Welcome to the Sunday morning Highland Heights Bible class. We are glad that you joined us for this conversation. If you haven't been with us, we have been going through the Ten Commandments. When Moses went up on the mountain as God is forming his new people, God begins a long list of laws that we will see throughout the rest of the Pentateuch, but he begins it with 10. And we are spending a lot of time with each one, going through each of the 10 one at a time and trying to figure out what is it that God has to say for his people today. Today we are on the fourth commandment, to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Ironically, out of all of the 10, it is the only one that is not repeated in the New Testament. So we will talk more about that. It does get a treatment in the New Testament, so we'll go there. So if you have your Bibles with you, let's go to Exodus chapter 20. And this is a longer one, so we'll be reading verses 8 through 11. So let's go to the scripture. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Okay. Jeremy, you might even want to start off with, what is the word Sabbath? That's not a word that we use all the time. I suppose in Christian circles, we use it more than other people do. But when we read this, what does it mean? And how do we as Christians follow this idea of Sabbath?
Well, like we talked about last week, a lot of times when we teach these, we learn them when we're young and we boil them down and then we just kind of move on, and we don't come back to them, which is a shame. So my guess would be what we've heard from this is the treatment it's often been given in church history, which is don't do work on Saturday, or for us on Sunday. And in fact, the idea of not working on Sunday got carried over into Christendom. If you've ever heard the term blue laws, okay, that referenced things that you were not allowed to do on a Sunday because it's a Sunday. It's the day of the week that's dedicated to God. And indeed, to indulge in a little bit of baseball history, one of the challenges back in the early days of Major League Baseball that the National League faced from this new challenge of the American League was the American League played on Sundays and the National League did not. Okay, which, the American League first became a major league in like 1902, 1903. The National League goes back to the 1800s. So, they're older. So they have those traditions in place. Okay. And the irony is, as you go through the Bible, that's kind of what the Jews did with it too. You see Jesus constantly having these confrontations with the Pharisees over what is and is not work, and indeed what is or is not acceptable to do on the Sabbath, because God makes it pretty clear here: do not do work on the Sabbath. The challenge is when we go to that, when we make that kind of our primary interpretation of this command, we wind up missing, and this is what Jesus is saying in the New Testament. And it's funny, this command is the only one that is not specifically repeated in the New Testament, but Jesus gives it quite a lot of treatment when he is on the earth. Okay, so there is a lot of discussion over what does this mean in the Christian world, or in the Christian dispensation, if you will. And when you dig down deeper into what's going on, what Jesus is kind of saying is, look, remember what the Sabbath is for. The Sabbath is so that we remember to take some time out of our lives for God. We've talked multiple times over the course of this lesson series about idolatry. And we talked about all the things that can become idolatry and kind of assume the place of God. And what's ironic is people don't fall into idolatry on purpose often. They fall into it by accident. Something just becomes gradually more and more and more important, and we replace the important with the urgent. And what the Sabbath was protecting them from, it was a reminder to say, hey, whoa, when it comes to those earthly things, you stop. And at least one day a week, you take time out for God. You make God a priority at least one day. And you take time to reflect on God, to remember God, to teach what God has taught you to your children. It's an idea we'll come back to later. You make sure that you are taking time out for God. So in a lot of ways, this is the reason God is setting this day aside, among others, is so that we have an opportunity to pause, step out of our busy lives, and go to God and remember God and take a time to say, okay, I'm going to focus on God first, and that's going to help me remember what's important. And then when I get into the daily rigmarole of life on, for us, Monday through Saturday, I will have that foundation of, okay, yeah, this is urgent, but I need to remember what's important too.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Kind of the balancing of the urgent and the important. You're making me think of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the first things he talks about is learn how to prioritize, right? If you're always putting urgent ahead of important, even if it's the urgent, important things, then the non-urgent but important things, which are often the most important things, those that you'll never get to them because there's always something urgent to do in life. Another thing that you have me thinking about is the context that we find the Israelites in. Pop quiz for everyone who's a part of this conversation. How many days a week were they working as slaves? If you said 7, there were no weekends. Not only had Jesus not been raised from the dead, the idea of a weekend was like, what? Huh? What are you talking about? You just worked all the time. That's what slaves do. And so as God is bringing them out of captivity, he's brought them out of physical captivity, but there's still the mental captivity. There's still even a spiritual captivity as they are acting as if they were still slaves in Egypt. So this is perhaps God's first strike at their physical lives, right? So the first 3 commandments have been setting up, I am God, you are to worship me, even my name is holy. But now he takes a strike at their physical lives. You're to be different. You're to pull a Chick-fil-A. You're just to throw away a complete day of productivity, right? If you were defining yourself by how productive you are throughout the week, you need to turn that on its head. You need to completely set aside a day to where you are not doing anything that brings value other than to rest and to worship as you rest. So they are being brought away from this idea, and not only was it the slave idea, but it was the idea of every other people in the world. The Israelites are being different in the way that they treat their God. Yes, this is a change for them. This is something that is different, and for anyone who comes into the Christian faith that comes out from somewhere that is outside to set aside time to worship and to reprioritize, to do the things that matter most, that are important and not urgent. That is countercultural. That goes against the way that our world operates today, and it's hard to do. I almost said that it's increasingly hard to do. I won't say that it's always been hard. To say that, we used to not have to open up business on this day. Well, we replaced it with other things, right? So there's always this temptation to give our time over to something other than that which is most important, which is God.
Right, and you think about, you mentioned several times, resting and recharging. Well, ultimately, as Christians, where do we believe our strength comes from? Okay. We believe our strength comes from God. We believe that we cannot do life on our own. And it's funny, you mentioned taking a day out of productivity. Well, here's the thing. The longer you use something continuously, the less productive it gets. How often do you restart your computer? Okay. My guess is exactly. My guess is you restart your computer about the time it becomes so slow that it's either that or chuck it through a window and go buy a new one. Okay. And sometimes, but Okay, what's happening there? You're giving those components a chance to rest and reset. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, we are giving ourselves a chance to rest and reset, but not only are we giving ourselves a chance to rest and reset, we're plugging ourselves in to continue, but hopefully not torture the computer metaphor here. We're plugging ourselves into the source of power. See, rest doesn't have to be just sitting and doing nothing. Yes, that can be part of rest, but it doesn't have to be that. Sometimes it's a change of focus. Sometimes it's a change of venue. Okay. Sometimes it's a subject change. Okay. One of the things that I found as I've grown up is it helps me every so often when I'm working on something, especially if it's a long-term project or something, set it aside for a little while and go do something else. I don't have to just sit and vegetate. If I just set it aside and go do something else, when I come back, I'm mentally refreshed and mentally recharged. So, what we're doing is when we go before God, look, as we talked about last week, we don't want to just unplug our brains and just sit and kind of vegetate in the presence of God. That's not worship. That's not what we're called to do. But it does give us an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to change my focus. And not only am I going to change my focus, I'm going to change my focus to where I get the strength. Because look, let's be honest, life is hard. I was recently in my Bible class at school, we were going through the book of Ecclesiastes. Fascinating book, a lot to unpack there. One of the things you learn in Ecclesiastes is the author of Ecclesiastes tries a lot of ways to find meaning in life. And he is constantly focused under the sun, which is life in the here and now. And what he discovered is in the here and now, it all goes away. And so I was taking my kids through, and they really didn't enjoy this, which is okay because I didn't either. You know, they're going to come to the end of the semester soon, and it's going to be a great Christmas break, and then they're going to come back. Well, and then they'll get to the end of the year, and they'll get summer break, and then in August they'll come back. And then in a few years, they'll graduate, which is great. And then they start college. Okay. And it's just life is really hard. Don't turn us off. Don't get depressed yet. Okay. Life is hard. But what the writer of Ecclesiastes illuminates is life is hard until you look at it from the perspective of God and you look at where you're going. Okay. What gives us the strength, what renews our productivity is remembering who we belong to, where we go, and taking a moment to take a break and retreat to God's refuge, worship of God, study of God, thinking about God, and that will empower us. We had a social club at Freed-Hardeman University that, you know, all the social clubs did spiritual retreats every semester, but this club did not call their spiritual retreat a retreat. They called it charge because they're not retreating, they're charging. And then in the spring, they called it recharge because I guess they were being clever. But that hits at a really good point when we go on these retreats or when we take a day or a Wednesday evening maybe and plug back into God with our Christian brothers and sisters. That recharges us. And that builds us up. And how often do we hear someone pray on a Wednesday night during our Wednesday night Devo? God, we thank you that we have this time to recharge and to gain strength to face the rest of the week. See, so what we got going on here is, again, a chance to plug back into that strength that makes it all possible.
Yeah. So yeah. We as Christians are very similar to the Israelites in this fashion, right? They were often getting off track, sometimes literally going around in circles, right? But one of the reasons for that was because they had lost focus. To use the word you were using there, they had lost focus on what it was that God was doing with them, how God was making them into a new people. We are forgetful people, just like the Israelites in this time. After Joshua goes and we get into the book of Judges, that they are constantly going away from the God that they love. And so it shouldn't shock us that we need a constant reminder. We need something that is planned, that is every Sunday. Everyone is very aware of this. So we are We're recording this video during a time when we're just not sure when are we going to meet, right? So when are the times when we're going to meet? And we're trying to be responsible with our decisions, but it takes consistency. A quick side story. So my mom, back in the day, she probably still does this, worked with taught Bible classes for a group of women that were recovering drug addicts, recently released from jail. And as part of, they were in a reentry program that was sponsored by the government, but our church would go over there and work with them. And one thing that my mom hated, other women that were teaching this class really hated, was when the congregation as a whole would either cancel church for some reason, which this was pre-COVID, it didn't happen that often, but most often it was, oh, we're all going to get together for some other thing. Basically, it was a break of the cycle of getting together to do this concentrated task, to do this one thing that brought consistency to their lives. And that's one of the things that they needed. Into the story is they eventually, the elders said, why don't y'all continue to meet even when we're doing something else differently here? This is good that y'all continue to meet. So we are in a time right now where it's very hard to develop habits. It's hard to develop a mindset that is continually going back to God. And outside of the gathering of the church, that is extremely difficult to do. Hopefully, everyone who's watching, everyone who's participating in this has some type of a pattern, some type of a habit that you've built up over the course of your life, where you're praying, you're reading your Bible, you are meditating on God's word, and you're having conversations with other people about these things, so that it's not just the 1 to 4 hours that we get together as a congregation, that this is something that is weaved into the way that we live. For God's people, it seems like sometimes they had it when the leadership was presenting it. When Joshua was in charge, the people were ready to follow. That was something consistent in their life. But leadership can't always be consistent. It has to be done at the personal level. It has to be done at the family level.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And one of the things you mentioned how hard it has been for us to get together. One of the things I personally, my wife has mentioned it multiple times, and I've heard others mention it too, is how much we miss being able to go to worship and to gather together. It's funny. We talk often about how God uses trials to strengthen us, which we're really good about talking about when we're not going through a struggle or a trial. But when we actually go through the quote unquote unprecedented times, to use a phrase that's been done to death recently, then it gets a lot harder, and we're a whole lot less happy with this whole idea of trials because it's hard. But we do learn things through trials. And one of the things that I hope we are learning as we go through this and appreciating more is appreciating coming together and seeing it less as an, I got to get up on Sunday morning and I got to go to worship and I got to go to Bible class and I got to go back and I got to do that. And I got to do this. And this is such an imposition to my time, and thinking more, man, I really miss getting that opportunity and missing and realizing the value of it. The book of Hebrews points this out in Hebrews 10:25, which, growing up, that was always cited whenever, in youth group, somebody would say, well, is it really a command that we have to go to church? Well, Hebrews 10:25 says, do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. And okay, look, if you need it to be a command, yeah, it's a command. But when we ask the question, is it a command? I think that's the wrong question. Okay. Because, okay, context, the context of the book of Hebrews, what is the writer of Hebrews, whomever it may be, what are they trying to say? What they're trying to say is they're dealing with Christians who are under pressure from the world and are under pressure and under the threat of falling away. And one of the things you learn as you read the book of Hebrews is falling away doesn't happen like that. It's something that happens. You look back 6 months later and go, wow, look at how far I've gone. Okay. So they're under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure that they might leave the church. And so in the book of Hebrews, what he's saying is, here's why you don't need to do it. And here are the things that will help you avoid that. And so it's in that context that he says, do not forsake assembling yourselves together. but continue to meet, stirring one another up towards love and good works. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a command, it's an admonition. And when we really understand what we're doing here, then our focus shifts, just like we've said multiple times. When we understand who we're doing this for and what we're doing, then our focus shifts. In this case, we are gathering together to worship God. Well, if we understand who God is and we love God, we will want to set time aside for him. It's not going to be a command, because people are going to say, well, here's the command to worship. And we're going to go, okay, I don't need it to be a command. I want to do this. I want to go before God. It's kind of like, somebody giving you a command. You are required to love your children. You don't have to require me to love my children. There may be days that, they're harder to like than others, but you don't have to require me to love my kids. That's just part of who I am. Okay. And in the same way, you don't have to require us, or you shouldn't have to require us to set time aside to go before God and to think about God. If we truly love God and God is truly a priority in our lives, we will want to. Now, is it harder some days than others? Yes. Okay. What I tell my students is, give me 100% every day. Some days 100% is not going to be as much as other days. Okay. If you've got a splitting migraine headache, 100% in worship is not going to be the same as when you're feeling good. Trust me. But so is it going to be harder some days than others? Yes. But at the same time, look, we want to be with God. We want a relationship with God. And this is one of the ways that we can build that relationship.
Yeah. I'm wondering, just continuing that thought, building a relationship with God, as you said, takes time. And if there's some people within our congregation, maybe you're watching right now, and you're in a good place. So what I'm about to say is not for you necessarily. But maybe you know someone, maybe you are this person who you're not in a good place with your relationship with worship, right? God is what comes next, but how do I get out of a funk, right? How do I get to a place where I love worship? How do I recalibrate? How do I get back to a place where I can truly worship? First of all, perhaps some of the things that you need to think about is, how do I remove the obstacles? What are the stressors that I have? Jeremy, we've been saying this whole time. The promise of Sabbath was the promise of not working, but for too many of us, and I oftentimes put a lot of stress on my wife on Sunday mornings. And whoever you are out there, whatever is that stressor that you link to church, right? How can you remove that? What are the steps that we can take to clear up our minds to be ready for Sunday? I will brag on my wife here, as much as I put additional stress on her on Sundays. She does everything she can. Whatever she was planning on doing on Sunday, she tries to do double on Saturday so that Sundays are clean, so that Sundays are clear. When Peter goes down for a nap, she has time to rest or read or do whatever she needs to do on a Sunday. Peter did not go down for a nap today. It was not good. What are the things that you can do in order to prepare yourself for Sunday? To be prepared is, to be quite frank, that's going above and beyond what a lot of Christians do. That said, it is setting yourself up for success. It's setting yourself up to be in the right place, in the right mind, and the right emotional and physical levels of energy to engage with God. Then you can also ask yourself, what are the auxiliary things that are connected to worship? Yes, we worship God first. We focus on Him. We empty our lives for communion. But there's also a lot of other good things that bring energy to our Sundays. Do you have friends as a part of Highland Heights or wherever you go? Do you have people that you enjoy seeing there? If you don't, reach out to someone, even if you're an introvert. Try to have connections that bring you into worship. And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but if you don't have other, people connections, maybe you should consider another congregation, a place where there are people that can build you up. Yeah, Jeremy's starting to question. They might cut the video at this point, but keep going. You have to make sure that nothing is getting in the way of you worshiping God. And I completely believe that the elders and ministers of Highland Heights would say, if Highland is getting in the way of you worshiping God, please go to a place where you can worship Him. So, Jeremy, I've spoken too long. Any thoughts there? And I know we only have 3 minutes. I'm wanting for us to also talk about, like, what are some of the big questions that come up about this, especially because we think of it a little differently than the Jews did. Is there something that is a particular question for Christians today about how should I treat this?
Well, yeah, we do think of it very differently. Just a couple of things to kind of make sure we say. One, growing up, I would hear people say, well, what are the things you can miss, and can you miss for your work? And look, I understand that question, and that can be a challenging question to unpack. Just like it can be challenging to say that phrase. That can be a challenging question to unpack. But let's boil this down here to a heart issue, a heart question. Okay. I don't know that there is a list of things. I mentioned before, what you can give when you have a migraine is not going to be the same as what you can give when you're feeling well. If you've ever had a migraine, you're probably looking at me going, wait, you go to worship with a migraine? Okay, look, 99% of the time, no, I don't. Okay, it's just because I'm not going to be there at all. So, like, if you're sick or something, that's a different issue. And so it's an issue of, where does your heart want to be, right? Yeah. Where do you want to go? What do you want to be doing? Okay, and what are we thinking about when we think about these things? So, the way we use it today, and we do things very differently than they did. Generally, we would get in a lot of trouble in first century Palestine because their interpretation of the law would probably include driving cars as work, and yet we drive to and from our worship services. So, but that illustrates kind of what Jesus is dealing with when he talks with them about this. He says, look, you're all caught up in the rules and what can and can't you do. You got the wrong focus. Okay. And I've said it before, if our concern is how close can we get to the line without going over, we've already got the wrong concern. Our heart's we're already misaligned in how we're thinking about this. Okay. So when we think about these things, we need to remember that we are engaging with a God who think about what God has done for us. And what's more, think about the fact that we know the whole story. Okay. In Jesus' day, they didn't have the whole story. Okay. We do, just a little over a chapter after the Hebrews 10:25 text, which is our proof text for dealing with some of these topics. The writer of Hebrews talks about how we know the author and finisher of our faith, and how the saints of old, the great men of faith of old, are surrounding us, watching us. They live their lives of faith, looking forward to what we now see complete. Okay. That's what we're doing, and that's what we're preparing to do when we set time aside for God. And we've focused a lot on Sunday morning because that's our worship period. Just like for most of Jewish history, the Sabbath day was their worship day. But when we think about coming before God in worship, it doesn't have to be on a Sunday. We need to remember who we're doing this for. We're doing this to praise God. We need to make sure that we're setting aside, the point you made about preparing. Okay. I think it's a very good point to remember, is we need to make sure that we're preparing to go to worship. Is Saturday night the night you stay up late, or do you go to bed early? Okay. And, I've been guilty of staying up too late on Saturday night myself. Okay. Are we mentally and physically preparing to enter into the throne room, the presence of God? Because that's what we're doing. We are entering into the presence of God. Every time we do that, like we talked about last week, we need to do that with respect to who God is and what he's done. Okay. We, just the act of being able to go before God is an act of grace. We, when we remember that and allow that to drive our thoughts, I think that will help us to focus in a way that just going and doing as a rote ritual doesn't.
We as Christians have we have such a blessing to be able to go in front of God. I like the way you said that. It is God's greatest gift to us, and how often we don't take it. Staying up late on a Saturday when you're planning on going to worship in the morning is the equivalent of not dressing up for a date with the most beautiful woman who said yes to you, right? We always dressed up, right? Whenever we went, not with each other. Okay.
Absolutely.
This video just, yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so I like the way that you said that. So we are running out of time here. I'm curious, Jeremy, are there closing ideas, something that sticks out to you about this topic that we as a congregation should fully engage with as we're reading this fourth commandment? As we're shifting, we're starting to shift away from these commandments being about how we treat God to how we act individually. How do we think about this commandment and why it's important for us as Christians today?
We're going to talk a lot about how we treat other people. And one of the core thoughts that I am sure will come up multiple times is people are made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. When we go to worship God, and look, we understand that right now things are very much in flux, very, very complicated. Okay. And this is not the time period that we're going to, it's become a joke, but it really is an unprecedented time. And so, there are a lot of circumstances out there that would providentially hinder someone from having the opportunity to gather. Okay. But make sure, even if you're in a situation, or we're in a situation where we are providentially hindered. I remember somebody I was in youth group with. They had opportunity to appear on a quiz bowl show in the Atlanta area in high school, but they filmed on Wednesday night. It showed up on Sunday morning, which made for great fun because we would all watch it the morning and then come and talk about everything that happened. And haha, you missed that question. But it was understood that was an exception to the rule. Okay. Mm-hmm. And two, this person went to a Christian school. And so their team took a minute to pray, just to pray, before they did the filming. They still took time to acknowledge God. So we need to remember as we transition, as we begin to transition from how we think about God to how we treat other people, this is an opportunity to reflect on God and on who he is and on what his priorities are. And when we reflect on that, that will make it a whole lot easier to remember, honor our father and mother, not murder, not commit adultery, not steal, not bear false witness, not covet, and not have the heart that would lead us to do those things. So we need to make sure we're carving out time to reflect on God.
Very well said. Closing thought here. I couldn't really think of a good place to fit this in, so this is kind of just a side note. I'll start off by saying this. My family and I, we try to be there whenever the doors are open, whenever they, however you say that. And while I believe that to be the best practice, because I want to be around my Christian family, I'm a bit heterodox on when it comes to like when should the church meet, right? I think that we as Christians should realize that while our elders make decisions for us, our leaders make the decisions, as a Christian body, we have a lot of freedom in what it looks like to meet, when it's proper to meet. So, we shouldn't change for the sake of change, but, there's could be healthy questioning there. That said, leading up to this point that has really no one place for it. Before we did our 10 Commandments series, we did our series on apologetics. And one of the most interesting apologetics that I've ever heard is that these Christians who used to be Jews, coming out of Judaism into this movement of Christianity, the way, one of the most convincing proofs that these people believed what they were doing is that they changed the day that they worshiped on. They were worshiping on the Sabbath, the fourth commandment. If God was ever specific about anything, he said, worship on the Sabbath. And all of a sudden they change it to be on a Sunday when Jesus rose from the dead. There is something powerful about gathering together to remember the event that marks before and after. There's before and after the resurrection, and that's all we need to know about history. So we should take the Sabbath seriously and show God our reverence because of what he has done for us. And we'll pick up with commandment number 5, thou shalt not murder, next time.